So we're continuing on in our study, just a little short one today. My dad told me I had to stop early so that he had more time for the message this morning. So we are going on a little bit in Revelation chapter 12. We'll just talk about a couple little things. Our study of Revelation has been full of a lot of things that have been at least unclear to me in the past, but have been more clear now. Showing us, most importantly, that it's revealing about Christ and His character. And that's the important thing about Revelation. Not knowing the unknown, but knowing more of who God is the most important part of Revelation. We talked a little bit more last week about the great red dragon and who that is and what it represents, and knowing that it reveals it to us here in Revelation 12. It tells us it's Satan. But when it's specific about numbers and specific about things that kind of pop up that sometimes in my past I have just read and been, okay, it just says that. Well, it sounds silly, but the Bible has meaning. These things have meanings. When you want to read these specific instances of why is it a specific number? Why is this a specific set of years? Why is this a specific amount? It's because it wants you to recognize it. It wants you to realize it. It wants you to research it more. It wants you to take into account a little bit more of the context of why is this important. So we were specifically talking about the great red dragon a little bit last week, and I wanted to go forth with it a little bit more, reveal a little bit more of a historical context for you here. There's a couple other things that, and when I say this, I just know that I'm being very careful, but there's things that come not from the Bible that connect with it, but I'll show you what I mean by that in a little bit. That there is a beautiful representation of Israel, and that's what Revelation chapter 12 is about. It's about the historical context of Israel. Last week we really hit on the idea that the woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and upon her head a crown of 12 stars is really referencing back to Joseph's dream, and how this is referencing who Israel is, that this is Israel's historical context throughout history. This is showing you who they are and what God and Satan are doing to Israel, or is in the background. Remember that Revelation is predominantly a Jewish book. There's a little bit to the church, but remember, the Bible is mostly of Jewish origin. It applies to you, it applies to me, but there's a lot of things that me and you won't intrinsically get because we weren't raised that way. There's a lot you have to research, and there's a lot of things that have become more important. They're raised and taught to learn by the Pentateuch and the law, and there's things that we don't inherently get, but as you've seen before with like the two witnesses and then the stones that we've seen before, as it becomes more clear, we see that, oh, this is a part of Jewish culture, this is a part of Jewish law. So when they would mention things, they would know immediately what it means, whereas me and you have to dig a little bit deeper. So we see that Israel is being put forth here in the beginning of the chapter, that it's delivering the child, which we see is Christ. We see that the dragon is there, and it's revealed later in Satan in verse 9. It says, "And that great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out in the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." So we talked a little bit about last week that them going through Jewish history, and this being an overview of what's happening behind the scenes in Israel, and this is kind of where I ended it last week, is kind of a chastisement of Israel in its the way that it presents itself. The chastisement of Israel, of them saying, hey, we know who we are. There's multiple portions of Scripture that we can turn to, and we won't today, but they're very ingrained in their own culture and their own history. They know where they came from. They know who's their lineage. They They claim to know their history. They say, we be of Abraham's seed, or I am of, they know where they came from, but they don't understand the history. They know their lineage. They know what's grounded in the earth. They know where their ancestors have been physically, but they don't understand the spiritual ramifications of it. They don't take these things and say, hey, when we came out of Egypt and we had the 40 years in the wilderness, we had this long, arduous process that we refused to just do what he asked us to do in the first place. But we remember that these were hard times. We were enslaved for 400 years. We had this aspect of, but we're God's chosen people. We belong. God used to talk to us directly, and now God's taking them out of it and saying, yeah, but I delivered Christ through you, and you rejected him. You were the chosen people because of who you were and supposed to be set apart. I was supposed to choose you to bring Christ to deliver you. The Messiah was supposed to come from you, and he did, but you rejected him as king. So taking the parallels of them saying, I know where I am, and I know where I came from. I know my history. I know who my grandfather's grandfather's grandfather is. I know where we came from. I can trace it right back to Abraham. But the inability to know what it means spiritually is what he's chastising here, I believe, in Revelation chapter 12. He's saying, this is who you are. He starts with basically Joseph's dream at the birth of the 12 tribes, you could essentially say. Those are the 12 stars. I'll tell you that's in Genesis 37, 9 through 11. He's saying where the sun and the moon and the 11 stars are bowing. So we know this is inherently a Jewish vision or an Israelite vision to say, this is where you started and this is where it really blossomed. And you guys can trace it back to your individual tribes, but you don't understand the greater context of what's going on. They refuse to acknowledge the dragon in front of them. He has to tell them about it. And that's kind of an interesting concept when you get into it. Today is going to be a little more theoretical and kind of the pronouncement of what's going on here and kind of the background of using what is this kind of device that he's using here. Again, just really quickly, I don't believe there was an actual physical woman clothed in the sun with a moon. This is a symbol. This is a metaphor. This is... Satan is not a literal red dragon with 7 heads. That is a representation of who he is. This is a metaphorical look at the history or a symbolic view of the history of Israel so that he can say this is what's grounded in each iteration of of certain historical landmarks. So the fact that he has to tell them the danger they were in, the fact that he has to acknowledge that there was a dragon ready to destroy you, he's teaching them their history. And basically where we ended at the last time was saying that's kind of a slap on the wrist to Israelite culture or to Jewish culture. People who are, like I said, were ingrained and they knew where they came from. Being explained their history is a chastisement, is a judgment in and of itself. Them saying, no, you don't understand. I'm going to tell you in a different way what your history is. This is me. You should be able to see the greater meaning behind your history and who you are. You should be able to understand what's going on because I've given you all the clues. I gave you the Messiah and he preached to you. He was on the earth for around 33 years and taught you these things and you didn't take him. So now we're going to go back and explain it even more so that I could make sure you understand your history and understand what was going on behind the scenes. We have a tendency as a people now, this isn't a bash Israel or bash Jewish study for sure, because spiritually I'm proselytized. I believe in Jesus. I believe in Christ. So I've been ingrained in this. So this is also an admonishment to me. I can take these principles and take these things and say, hey, this is what I should learn from this. What he's giving them here is the idea that they're too grounded in the physical realm of what they're going through. And maybe you aren't prone to doing that, but I am. I get too focused on what's right in front of me. I'm too focused on lack of sleep. I'm too focused on my drive to work. I'm too focused on the school. I'm too focused on the things that are happening right in front of me, and cannot take a step back and have the greater spiritual view of what's happening. I cannot take a step back and see the dangers that are here. Israel didn't know the dragon was there. They didn't know this was happening. Israel didn't understand the dragon was continuing, was poised ready to try to devour them. They didn't understand they were being saved. They didn't know. A refusal to understand the danger in front of you, not knowing you're in danger, is one of the worst situations you can be in, because you're careless. You get flippant. You do things you don't know are dangerous. You can think of, like my daughter would run out into traffic not knowing she's in danger. And it's not that she should understand right away, but it's just the childlike mentality. But it's still dangerous. It doesn't take away the ramifications of her position. She should have, and she has had, people watching over her like a hawk, because we have to, because she does whatever she wants all the time. But it's one of those things where you have to continually understand that he's teaching them that you have someone watching over you. He's saying, I've delivered you from things that you don't even understand. He's like, you don't know that there is a proverbial dragon poised, ready to take things away from you. You don't understand that there's a war in heaven. You don't understand that there's things going on behind the scenes that you don't even know. And you continue to not understand. Remember where we are now in Revelation chapter 12 of the things that have happened the prior 11 chapters. The things that have happened, we've had the witnesses come down, we've had the judgments, we've had some vials, we've had these things that are just an absolute giant pointer to the heavens of saying this is unashamedly and unmistakably who this is from. You know, meteors falling from the sky and people, the sky literally opening and people hiding in the rocks refusing to accept their fate. And they're still not accepting or not realizing who's in control. And that's the whole world. That's not just Israel. That's the whole world we've seen. So, as we go forth into this, understand that Revelation 12 is an admonishment to Israel of their past and of their present. He's saying, you don't understand, and you cannot separate yourself from what you're doing right now in the moment. You are not seeing the bigger picture. And again, that's also an admonishment to me. I'm not saying that that's a purely Israel thing. That's hey, you need to be able to understand the things going on behind the scenes, or at least accept that they're there. Have a broader view. Don't get into the tunnel vision. I could use the idea of that if you're driving down, let's use the most dangerous road in the world, I-4, and you have tunnel vision. I can't think of a place that you need to have greater understanding of your surroundings than I-4. And have the broader view of understanding who's beside you, what's going on, and what's happening in front of you. And even sometimes what's going on behind you. I've had several coworkers get rear-ended just out of nowhere in I-4 because it just happens. But knowing that you cannot have what's going on in just your lane in front of you. You cannot constantly only focus on what's just in front of you. You have to have that greater view of what's happening to be completely safe. That's hopefully not too much of a stretch there. There's the idea that you cannot only focus on you to be able to be safe or to be prosperous or to not fail. You have to have that greater view of what's going on around you. You have to have that step back and understand the spiritual and emotional and physical ramifications of your actions, of the things that you refuse to do or the things that I refuse to do or do in spite of everything else. So Revelation 12, and this is kind of just a little bit of an overview day, because I'll probably finish up a little bit early, is a giant reorganization of their thoughts. It's saying this is how you should view your history and your current position, of on the precipice of extreme danger, but continually being delivered out of it by me. That is what God's telling them here. That in verse 11, probably the most beautiful portions of the scripture, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they loved it, not their lives unto the death. Rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down to you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And we see that in verse 14, that the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time, times and half a time from the face of the serpent. And we'll see times and half of times. We'll get into more of that next week. That's reference back to Daniel as well. And the serpent casts out of his mouth, in verse 15, water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of the seed, which kept commandments of God and have testimony of Jesus Christ. So now we see that the chapter is kind of stops to where they are, as right at the beginning of, basically of the culmination of Revelation. It's like, what is the dragon doing now? Verse 17 is what the dragon is doing now to me and you. That's what the dragon's doing right now. It is making war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have testimony of Jesus Christ. This is what's perpetually happening. So, understanding that you are under attack, understanding that you are being persecuted, understanding that you are being fought against, is the first step in understanding that you have to fight. If you don't, and that's where the devil is incredible, that they're talked as he's a lion, is that a lion doesn't make itself known until it's ready to pounce. That's not how they hunt. They don't just chase you down. He hides, he sneaks, and waits until you're unaware. You don't even know you're in danger. So knowing that he is here and realizing that the great danger we are in, or the great persecution you're in, is the most important part of how you should live your Christian walk. Being on guard is important. My dad had a long study, every study from him is a long study. We've had a long study of the Watchtower's ministry, and it showed a lot of things, and it made me think about it in a different light, of realizing that the Watchtower's ministry is not just a tower. It's not just a piece, it's not just a simple piece of architecture. It's an action. It's a continuing evaluation of the surroundings. A watchtower is important to realize the enemy is coming. That's what the watchtower is for. It's to say something's there that shouldn't be. It gives you an advantage to be able to realize that you're going to be attacked. So the idea of knowing that you're in danger at first is the most important part of this. So we'll close today for that, and we'll go into deeper to the syntax of it all, and understand some of the times and a half. I shortened myself today because I started a little bit late, but hopefully I'll leave my dad more time for next week. Mr. Stewart, do you mind closing us in prayer this morning?
Father, we thank you for the resurrection